Hello, welcome to this video. In this episode, what I'm going to do is, even though I haven't got the gaskets and stuff yet, I've got enough to put the Strombergs back together and set the baseline setting. And then I've got another video, which I've already done yonks ago, so those that have been following me for a while will remember that I went through and did quite a good tutorial on balancing these things up on a Rover V8 in part of my 1972 project. But what I'll do is I'll highlight that episode in the description below this episode. So this one purely is going to be around setting up the baseline on the carburettor and assembling them as best you can. Now obviously I've got all the bits here, they're all laid out nice and methodically, and I have been over, cleaned everything that needs to be cleaned, okay? And we'll go through each of these individual components as we go through. Now I haven't finished cleaning these carbs yet. They've been through the small ultrasonic tank, and they've got not bad actually, they're not bad at all. But what I haven't got here is my rotary kind of gentle brush that I put in the drill bit and just run with a little bit of WD-40 on it, and it cleans all of this crud off around the outside of the carburetors, makes them look a little bit tidier. Right, in the last episode, bearing in mind that these carburetors will sit on the inlet manifold in this orientation, so this will be the passenger side left hand carburetor, and this will be the driver's side or right hand carburettor, and we're already out of focus. This camera is dying fast, I think. There we are, that's a bit better for you. Hopefully that's going to work for a minute or two. Now, when the choke is in position on these, it comes with this kind of little funny bit on here. Does it come? Yeah, that way round. And there was a black cable that connects the two carburetors. Now, obviously, that black cable, or black pipe I should say, is the feed for the choke supply onto the driver's side or right hand carburettor. So that's one thing I probably didn't make very clear in the strip down video. Quite important, that thing, and that's why there's only one mechanical choke module on these carburetors, whereas the Stag for some reason has one on each carburettor. Maybe because they didn't have the room for the balance pipe between the two, I don't know. Anyway, these carburetors are also they're Stromberg, Zenith Stromberg 175 CDs. Now there is also a 175 CD2, and I think these carburetors are actually, if I had the tag, I would have them as a designation of CDS 175s, and they're kind of specific for, I think, Land Rover applications and so forth. Correct me if I'm wrong below. But this kind of tutorial is going to go through and really give you a good idea about how to put together a Zenith Stromberg 175 constant depression carburettor, regardless of what application it's going into. And then if we look at the balancing video, which I've already done, it'll give you a good indication about how to get them running. So what I'll do is, I'm on the tripod already. I'll balance the tripod on the bench. We're only going to put one of these two together, and I'll go through exactly what it is I do when I'm doing this. So we'll put the left-hand carburettor together because it's got the choke module and stuff on it. It's more fun. Right, so where are we? Let's go like this. Right, so with the carburettor in its bare state, okay, we've still got tubes, emulsion tubes, jets, God knows what else, it's all in there. With it in its bare state and having given it a real deep cleanse, there's actually quite a few little holes and jets and things around and about. What I tend to do is use the old air hose. I'm not going to do it now because it makes a shitload of noise, but use the air blaster and jet it through every single one of these little holes. Okay, jet through the choke enrichment holes, jet through the carb filler hole. This is the breather hole here, so I jet through that. All of these little bits all over them, you need to just make sure you just clean every single one of them out before you start assembling. Because otherwise, you know, you may well find that the fault with the carburettor originally was a bunged up hole somewhere on it that's then causing you difficulty. Okay, so that's the first thing I do. Next thing I do, right, let's start from the bottom of the carburettor and work our way up, because it's probably the easiest way of explaining this. So we start with the float chamber needle valve. So it looks very much like this. Okay, they're actually really easy to test. Put your mouth over that bit there. Obviously have it cleaned first of all. You can see these have been through the ultrasonic cleaner. You're going to focus. No. These have been through the ultrasonic cleaner and are looking really nice at the moment. I've tested them. The needle valve works really well. There's no reason why these need to be changed. I mentioned in my last video that there's a really common reason why Triumph Stags might flood their Stromberg carburettors, because it seems to be quite a common problem. It was certainly a problem that affected my Stag. And as I mentioned in that strip down video, the key problem here is that there's no return pipe back to the fuel tank. There's only a feed pipe which goes through a filter and sits there waiting at the carburettors. And the pump kind of, it's not a constant running pump like one of these facets, but it runs up to a certain pressure before it cuts off. Now, the pump that I've got on my car is an SU points pump. I fitted it 20 something years ago when I first got the car, and the car never really quite ran that nicely at idle. If you sit in idle for a couple of minutes or so, it will start to chug, hunt, okay? And that's fairly typical of any carburetted engine. The idle does start to bog down a bit. However, fitting a fuel pressure regulator before it gets to the carburetor and setting that at, I think I set mine at about 2.5 psi, resolved all of the problems I was getting with running, with pulling away from idle. Much smoother power delivery. So I chose a Malpassi Filter King because it's got the filter in it as well. There's all sorts of different types of fuel pressure regulator. Just get one that's decent. And as long as it's before the carburetors or in between the pump and the carburetors, you'll be okay. Now I can hear you saying now, yeah, but I've got an OE spec fuel pump. Check the pressure on it. Mine was putting out 5.5 psi. These float valves, maximum pressure these things are supposed to do is 3 psi. Okay? So you can imagine that extra 2 psi is just sitting at this fuel inlet, and I know this carb's upside down, but sitting at this fuel inlet, waiting for the engine to gobble a little bit of fuel before this opens. And when it does open, all of a sudden, there's 5.5 psi there, and this thing will struggle to close again. And then it floods the carburettor, and then everyone bitches about how shit Strombergs are. Right, so without further ado, let's put in the needle valve. And I'm just using a 14mm. I don't need to go prehistorically tight. However, what I want to be able to do is to be able to now blow on this while I'm putting my finger on there. So let's have a look at my haircut. Yep, that's good. So there's no leakage there. Now, if I was going absolutely berserk on this thing, I might be inclined to just put a ratchet on there. But this is an aluminium body, brass float valve. It really doesn't need enormous amounts of torque on it. Just do it up. Make sure the washer's underneath it, brass washer. Okay, so that's the switch that allows the fuel into the float chamber. Now, the next thing we need to do is to put the float in. Now, the float actually is the device that tells the carburetor when to stop lobbing fuel in. Okay, so this float, if we put him on, and just to assemble him, what you basically got here is you've got a nice pin. It's got two little notches on it. It goes through the float itself, and the float hinges off it. So if I put that onto there, now the float is hinged, okay? And that's the way it works. So what basically happens with the carburetor the right way up, when the carburetor is empty, you can see the float valve here is open. And as the carburetor starts to fill up, then it closes. You can see this little lever here is closing the float valve, needle valve. And it gets to a point where enough fuel is in that float chamber and it will stop the fuel coming in. So it stops it overflowing. Reason number two why these things flood is because people don't set them up right. So this float needs to be set up correctly. Now, what I tend to do is on the highest part of the float, which is the part of the float nearest to the hinge, that needs to be, I think, let me just grab my book, I think it's 16 to 17 millimetres. On Rover V8s, it depends on the application. Check your manual. Your manual will tell you, workshop manual will tell you the float height. Measure it from the body of the carburettor. Don't put the gasket on first. And you measure it, and it's supposed to be 16 to 17 millimetres. Now, I've got that at 15. So, in order to adjust it, you bend this tab here. So, if I just bend that just a smidge and go back again, now what have I got? Gone the wrong way. Silly arse. So now what have we got? Now we've gone berserk and we have got 17. The 17 mil, that's what the float should look like. Where it was, which was down there, was allowing too much fuel into the float chamber. Okay, what happens when you get too much fuel into the float chamber is fuel pisses through the main jet hole down there. So when the throttle opens, too much fuel is delivered because there's too much fuel in the float chamber. It's as simple as that. How much easier does it need to be? So you regulate the amount of fuel that the float chamber holds by setting the float level height. You regulate the amount of pressure that is sitting, waiting, kicking the back door in for the little float valve, using a pressure regulator, or making sure that the return feed is in place and is unblocked and is clear. And that is it. That is now the bottom end of that carburettor actually set up. So let me pop on the float chamber. Now, I know there's no gasket going on. I haven't got the gaskets yet. Rest your sphincters. I'm just going to pop it on because I just want to kind of loosely assemble this carburettor. I'm using a neon screwdriver for some reason. I don't know why. As you can see, all these screws have all been cleaned up nicely. This is everything so far is the bits that came off these carburettors, these derelict carburettors. Every single thing going back on is exactly as it came off. Now, because I'm resetting everything up from a baseline, I didn't say which float went from which carburettor or which needle valve went to which carburettor. I don't care because it's all being set up. I'm testing everything. If anything is slightly dubious, I'm going to replace it. We'll come to some of those bits in a minute. Right. Again, when you're doing these things up, don't go berserk with it. You really don't need an impact wrench to do these bloody things up. Nor do I find you need to use thread lock. They've got a little spring washer on them, tiny little spring washer. Actually, no, it's not a spring washer, it's just a washer. It is just a washer. No, it is a spring washer, I can see now. There's a split there. Tiny little spring washer. I just don't go berserk with them. You'll soon tell if you've got a fuel leak because you can see it dripping around the outside of the fuel float, the float chamber. So that's the bottom of the carburettor done. Let's put these screws back over there because I don't want to lose these. These are for the other ones. Now, in the first video, I did show you how to just double check the jet depth. So the jet is the gold bit in the bottom there. It's not gold, I'm afraid, it's brass. What you need to do is you need to measure the how far this is recessed from the ridge around the outside of the brass jet to the bridge that surrounds it. It's dead easy. It's easier than falling down a flight of stairs. Easier than getting a beer. So what I tend to do is use something like a drill gauge, something with a hole in it that's reasonably rigid. Because on my vernier caliper, you've got a little thing that comes out the bottom of it, and you use that to measure depth. So I line that all up on there. I push the vernier caliper down. Can you see? I don't know, you probably can't see. I'll move that hand out of the way. Push the vernier caliper down until it sits on the bridge. And it does. Don't care about that measurement. That measurement means absolutely nothing to me. Now I want to zero it. So I hit the old zero button. Oh, not hitting the zero button. I'll hit the zero button. No, if I press the wrong button, I need to go back to inches. So let me just do that again. Very cack-handed today, Richard. Right, so we're down there. Let's hit the zero button. And then I go to the edge of the bridge and I push the depth gauge down, or the vernier down, a little bit further to meet with the outside edge of the jet. And I take off, and we're 85 thou. The measurements seem to be around the 90 thou mark. But 80 to 100 thou, you're in the right ballpark. If it's too deep, the jets, then what then happens is that you find it difficult to get the mixture set correctly. And if it's too shallow, then the needle will not be able to recess, and the piston, the damper, will not be able to bottom out on the bridge. So it's quite important that jet is set to the correct height. Okay? Job number 2. Right. Setting the rest of this carburettor up is fairly straightforward. So what we'll need to do next, we'll look at the piston damper. Now, one of these, this one here, this engine's had some pre-ignition. And I think these actually came off the set of carbs that I had. I bought another set of derelict carbs, which went on to the 1972 car. And I think that piston came out of that car, because this one's not too bad. It's showing signs of life, but it's nowhere near as bad as that one. Right, let's go and get a screwdriver. Right, this little bit is one of the few moving parts in the carburettor, and this really, it has two functions. First of all, it supports it, or it covers has. Put teeth in. Should I put my teeth in? I'm going to put my teeth in. This thing has two functions. First of all, it holds the diaphragm. The diaphragm's the kind of the unique thing about these CD Strombergs. And the second thing it does is the needle locates in the bottom of it. So here's the needle. This is the metering needle, which goes into the jet. And that's the idea. It sits in down there, but it attaches to the base of this dashpot, this piston. Now, there's a couple of things with the needle. First of all, you want to make sure there's no unnecessary ridging on it. Now, I'm probably going to get a new pair of needles for these, because while this one is okay, the other one I've got is looking a bit more distressed. It's got quite a big ridge at the top there. So I will get new needles. Now, the needle comes in multiple parts. You've got the adjuster, which sits on the top of it. You've got the needle, which doesn't come apart any further than that. That's as much as it does. And you've got a little star washer, which holds the adjuster into the top of the damper. Now, this thing is really, really, really important. The number of carbs I've taken apart where that adjuster is just sitting in the tube with no star washer on top of it. And because of that, the needle can go wherever it wants to. So I have partly assembled this just to kind of not lose things. But what we'll do is just take off the top plate because the diaphragm needs to go underneath this. We'll talk about diaphragms in a second, but first of all, we're going to talk about needles. Bom, 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 bom. Here we go. Right, 4 screws. There's a metal plate in here as well, and then there's the base plate there. I haven't cleaned these. All I've done is just wipe them over because they weren't that bad to start with. Just wipe the oil off that. There's some excess oil in there. Right, that can all go over there. Now, on the actual damper, there is a grub screw hole here. A little flat blade screwdriver. Don't go berserk with the thing. Don't break it off. Don't glue them in. I've had at least one of these has been glued in the past. And you've just got to ask yourself, what sort of moron glues a grub screw into a bloody damper? Carburettors are like a fine wine. They should be drunk. No, that's wrong. Right. What we'll do next is we will first of all check that the adjuster screws correctly into the end of the needle, the metering needle, because sometimes the threads can get a bit chewed up, believe it or not. That one goes in nicely and all the way. Next thing we'll do is we will change out the little O-ring that's on this adjuster. And the reason we do that is because that's the only thing that stops the oil. It's 20. They just want a kind of an EP20 oil, not an EP. What are you talking about, Richard? It's just a 20 SW, 20. I can't remember what the exact phrase is. But it's the reason why I normally use engine oil. That's why I'm chuntering on there. I just use an engine oil, and it works a treat. Right. Okay. Let's. Probably the easiest way of getting this off is to just use a razor blade on it. It's not even a razor blade, is it? It's a Stanley blade. These O-rings can get quite brittle. This one's not. This one ain't too bad, but it's still going to get replaced. So what I'll do is I'll mount it on here to save myself stabbing myself with all of the kind of usual comedy gold moments. Come on, you bastard. Just thinking about it. This is sometimes why I cut these things. Oh, you bastard. Where's my screwdriver? Right, that'll do it. If I kind of force it around the channel and then take it over the top, and there it is, the little O-ring. Okay. Give the channel a little clean out. Now on this one, the channel's good. You can see all the way around, nice uniform gap where the O-ring goes. The other one, I don't know if you remember from the first episode, this thing's been properly chewed up. I don't know what sort of ham-fisted gibbery has been going on in here, but I need to tidy this one up before it can go back in. That's for the other carburetor. Now, what have we got here? Just a case of... Don't be alarmed, no continuity issue here. I just decided to re-video this bit because it didn't make sense in the stuff I videoed yesterday, and I've had a sleep since. Right, when we're coming down to putting the needle, the metering needle, into the dashpot, it's quite important that the thread on the adjuster goes right into the needle and goes in easily. So the problem I've got with this is that the adjuster itself is very used. If I just drift him out, in fact, and I can talk to you about this. Sorry, bang, 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 bang. Right, so on this adjuster, we can see, you can't see because it's not in focus, camera's playing me up. It's the motor for the focus that's not working on it. But on this thing, you've got quite a thin, finely machined surface that the O-ring goes into. And it's not the best. It really isn't. And also when it comes to the needle itself, I would expect that thread to go in really, really easily all the way up to being fully in. And you can see I'm having to work quite hard at that. Okay, there we are, it's on now. So that's the fully home, richest position that this needle should be able to adjust to. And then as you wind it out, it pushes the needle back down and makes the mixture leaner. Now, of the components that you've got for the metering needle, you've got the star washer, probably the most important thing here, the adjuster, the grub screw, and the needle itself. So the star washer holds the adjustment screw in a fixed location, allows it to turn but holds it in a fixed location. Okay, if this thing moves up and down, then you're not going to be able to move the needle, or the needle might just move up and down independently of the damn thing. So it's quite important that that star washer is in place. And I've undone a fair few of these carburetors where that star washer is not in place. I'm going to replace this star washer, I'm going to replace this adjuster screw, and I'm going to replace the jet on these carburetors, these derelict carburetors that I'm rebuilding, because I'm not happy with them. The grub screw, all that really does is it stops the needle from spinning. Okay, so effectively what you're doing is if you're locking the needle so the needle can't spin in the dashpot, and the grub screw, or the adjuster screw, sorry, that's the grub screw, the adjustment screw is fixed in its height, then by winding that, you're going to be pushing this needle up and down. You understand how the mixture tuning works, okay? Needle goes down, makes the mixture leaner. Needle goes up, the mixture gets richer. Because the needle's tapered, the needle goes into a fixed jet hole, okay? Not a fixed jet, but it goes into a jet hole. And as the needle comes up, you can see it's kind of, because it's tapered, it's going to run richer. So the further the needle is up inside the dashpot tube, yeah, the richer the mixture is going to be. Now, when you're assembling this lot, okay, a few tips and tricks here. Star washer should be a really nice cup shape. Now, I expect if this thing's been in and out a few times, it's probably shagged out. And this was looking shagged out, so I'm going to replace the star washer. Effectively what you need to do is you've replaced the O-ring on the adjuster, you've checked that the thread on the adjuster goes into the needle, okay, and it does. You can put the adjuster into the top of the tube along with the star washer, dish side down, okay. I would use the adjusting tool, which is around somewhere. Here it is, sorry, it's been mysteriously taken up there. And put the adjustment tool over the top of the whole assembly and just push it down inside the tube. It's a bit of a struggle because obviously you've got a star washer and you've got the adjustment. So there we are, that's in, fully home, ain't going to go any further. You don't have to go berserk with it, you don't have to hit it with a £5 hammer or anything. And now when I turn the lever, I can see the end of the adjuster turning inside the dashpot. So that's good news. The next bit. We need to ensure now, with the thread, adjuster thread in there, that this needle is actually going to locate onto that thread, okay, and locate fully onto that thread. So what we need to do now is, I just normally give it a little wind, just to get it onto the end of the thread, and then wind it clockwise. Wind the adjuster clockwise, okay? And when the needle starts to drag, which it is because the thread's not very, very clean on this, I wind it around to where the grub screw goes in. You can see the slot on the needle there, metering needle, and you can see the hole where the grub screw goes. I'm going to install the grub screw. And that goes in, okay, and then we wind the rest of the way clockwise until we hit a stop, and that's stopped, okay. That now is the needle running as rich as it possibly can go. The needle is recessed right inside the dashpot. Now, in theory, I can wind this all the way anti-clockwise, and the needle will be off the end of the thread, okay. That's the leanest this carburettor will run. Okay, the needle is right at the end. If I start winding clockwise again, that needle should re-engage on the thread and pull back in. And on this carburettor, on this dashpot, it just does not do that. I don't know why. If I get another one, this is one that's been rebuilt already. See, it's got nice. Even this one's showing signs of heat on the dashpot. This isn't run very long either. So let's wind entirely clockwise. So winding right in clockwise, and we'll get to a stop. Stop, as rich as it will go, and then we'll wind right the other way, anti-clockwise, to as lean as it will go, and it will get to a point where it's just going to continue winding because the needle's off the end of the thread. And all you're really doing then is you're just holding the needle at its furthest point. And on this one, is it going to go much further than that? I would expect it to go, oh, it's just going a bit further. There it is, coming out. And that's it. It's not very far out. It's not as far out as this one is. This is why I think that there's possibly a problem with the adjuster or the needle on this. Now, we've got it at its weakest mixture. And if I was to undo the grub screw, in fact, let's do that. The needle will come out. Okay. Put the needle back in again. Put the grub screw back in again. Right, grub screws back in. And we'll wind it clockwise again. Yeah, it's winding back in again. Winds all the way in till I can't wind it any further. Stop. Wind it back out again. I think it's about 2.5 winds from end to end. And then wind it back in again, and it goes back in again. And wind it all the way out, so it won't go any further. Yeah, 55 turns. There it is, as lean as it will go. And it goes straight back in again. So what we've got here, and I'm going to baseline this one while it's off. So I'll baseline him so that the edge of the jet, the brass part of the jet, sorry, metering needle, is level with the dashpot. You see that? So what we've basically got here is the derelict carbs that I've been rebuilding as part of this series need a few parts. And the reason this needle is not going back into the thread is because the adjuster is screwed. I'm fairly sure of it. So I'm going to replace the needles anyway because they've got ridges on them. I'm going to replace the adjusters because they're just chewed up. And I'm going to replace one of these dashpots as well. This one's all right. The other one's a bit knackered. I don't know if that makes sense. Does it make sense? That's the needle gone in. So next, let's look at the diaphragm. Diaphragm, really, really important bit of kit in the constant depression CD Zenith Stromberg Carburettor, because if these things have got splits in them, or they're not installed correctly, then you will not get the vacuum to lift up the damper inside the carburettor body. This one is in good order, so I'm going to reuse it. I think I mentioned in the first video, be wary of some of the pattern parts that are out there. There is some shocking crap out there, there really is. Right, the second thing you'll notice about the diaphragm is it has actually got a lug on it. It's got two lugs on it. It's got one there, it's got another one there. These lugs correspond to slots in the body. So there's the slot, there's the lug. That needs to go on there like that. And there's a very good reason for that, and I'll explain that in 1 second. But now that I've got that in there, I can put the adapter back on the top that holds the diaphragm in place. And then I can install the screwies. Yes, I can see in there, I can see the slot, and I can see that the diaphragm has gone into the slot. So let's whiz these screws up now. Again, they don't need to be done up to 55,000 square foot. They don't need to be thread locked in. They don't need any of that shit. Just do them up, nip them up, and you'll be fine. Now, there's a reason for the orientation of this diaphragm, and that is the keener eyed of you will notice that the needle is actually slightly offset, believe it or not. So when I hold this thing, you can see the needle is slightly bent in one direction. So it kind of like, it's bent upwards there, so it's going that way. And the reason for that is, it needs to go into the jet in that direction. So it goes into the jet on the, so that is the inlet side, and that's the butterfly side. So we'll put that tab on the diaphragm, that tab on the diaphragm goes into that hole on the body. And that means then that the needle is located absolutely perfectly inside the diaphragm body, inside the carburettor body. What you're talking about, Richard, again. Lastly, we'll put on the dashpot and the spring. Don't forget the big old spring. So this spring helps the dashpot to close up again. I've just picked 4 of these screws. I'm going to order new screws and odds and sods. It all needs sorting out properly. Because, oh, Mr. Gravity. Oh. Right, when you put the dashpot top on, and these I've just been over very, very lightly with a bit of steel wool. When you put the dashpot top on, it lines up. You'll notice there's a moulding line there and there. Just line those two up. You won't go far wrong. If you've got the tag with the number on it still, put it on there. Don't dump them. Don't think, what's that? Throw it away. They're actually useful for folk like me to understand what carburetors I've got, and when I order parts, make sure I've got the right parts coming in. The needles for this thing, I have found the needle number on there. I think it's F1, something or other, I can't remember now. But anyway, whatever the needle was, I'll put it in the comments here. Was correct for the Rover V8 on a Range Rover 3.5 low compression engine. Again, I'm not whizzing these right up. There is no gasket, by the way, in between the dashpot and the diaphragm. It's not supposed to be there. Okay, right, so that's done the top of the carburettor. Now the only thing we're missing on this is the piston that goes in the top, the damper piston. And this is the device that your only maintenance you should need to do with these things once they're topped up is put engine oil in there. So just use a, I don't know, oily bird or something, squirt engine oil in there. And then your damper looks very much like this, except this one's broken, so I'm not going to put it back in. It's probably good enough for this application, but the idea behind it is that on the end there pushes down into the oil and goes inside this tube here. And when you open the throttle and this goes up, you don't want this thing springing up. You want it to go up gently. If it springs up, it's going to go too rich and it's going to flood the engine. Okay? Now this thing's actually not returning back down to the bridge again for some reason. Probably because it needs a bit of a lube. It does. It goes down to the bridge when I do that to it. There's just a, again, WD-40 just really there to. It's getting better. It's probably just because it's all been cleaned up, and really you want that damper needs to go right down to the bridge. There we are, getting there now. There we are, it's getting. And it's down onto the bridge. You can hear it bottoming out. So that's one thing you need to make sure happens before you start pissing around with the carburetors. Just make sure that you can push it right up and it swings right back down again. Okay, that's good. On the subject of diaphragms, so these are the, I believe, fairly good quality diaphragms that came on the derelict set of carburetors. You can see they're in reasonable order. This is a cheap pattern part. Look how nicely it rests in its position. I'm not entirely convinced about the surface. I know this has got oil on it. It feels about the same thickness. I'm not going to do any. Oh look, this one's torn. That's how good that is. That has never been used. That diaphragm has never ever been used and it's torn. Look at that. I don't think I need to say any more on this subject, do I? In fact, it's torn over here as well. So this is what's happening to cheaply made rubber components. It's not rubber. And I don't know what they've done, that they've changed something in the makeup of this stuff, because it just tear this apart. I know I'm destroying a non-serviceable diaphragm, but look how easy it just rip it apart. Useless. Now, this is the diaphragm which came off the rebuilt set of carbs over here. I bought those a while ago. Now these diaphragms, I mean everything in this carburetor, you can see it's pretty new. But look at these diaphragms. I don't know what it is. It's just not pretty. These ones, nice smooth beaded edge on the inside edge of the diaphragm where it meets. This one, I don't know. Doesn't look pretty though, does it? It's got some stretch to it, I'll give it that. I wouldn't be using those. The good news is that even if your diaphragm does split, they're actually fairly easy to change over, even in situ. You undo the 4 screws around the dashpot, around the top piece, 4 screws. That comes off with the spring. And then underneath it you will find you have got the, in fact this is the old one, this is the one off the derelict carb. You then got the diaphragm, and it sits like that. You undo the 4 screws here. You can actually take the whole dashpot out, or just undo the 4 screws. Take the whole dashpot out, be aware that this tube should have oil in it. So when you tip it upside down, it's going to pour oil all over the place. But you could, in theory, undo these 4 screws here, replace the diaphragm, put the dashpot back on again, and be on your way. There's no need to retune the car after you replace a split diaphragm. But I just thought that was an interesting kind of comparison between a new reproduction diaphragm, a brand new reproduction diaphragm, which has never even seen service, and an original, better quality diaphragm, I believe. Now, as I understand it, I think a company called Berlin own the Zenith Stromberg brand, or the rights to make these things. Correct me if I'm wrong below, but I do tend to use, there's a website I use for a lot of the parts for rebuilding these things. It's not eBay, I'm afraid, folks. Unless I'm buying derelict carb sets, of course. But there's if you search for it, I think it's Zenith Carb or Berlin, and you will find good quality rebuild kits for these carburettors. Yeah, sure, you can buy them for £1.80 off eBay, and probably don't need to say any more on that subject, do I? Or you could spend 20 quid on them and hope that they last a bit longer. Or you can buy 10 of them and just change them at the roadside every time they tear. I don't know how old that one is. It was in a box of unused carburetor parts, and as you saw, it had 2 tears in it. So it's not very good, really, is it? But yeah, buyer beware on the whole subject of diaphragms, carburetor diaphragms, because it's the diaphragm that makes these constant depression carburetors. I guess it makes them unique in that if the diaphragm fails, the carburetor will fail. Right, next, we're missing the throttle butterfly. It would normally sit in there, so let's pop that in next. Now, because we're on the left-hand carb, we want the throttle butterfly that goes right the way through the body, which is this one, in this Rover V8 application. So again, we take all the bits off and we lay them out on the bench in the order from whence they come, and it makes life just a wee bit easier. Okay, there's the shaft. I might just put a little bit of lube on the shaft for now, just so that it goes in. I want it slipping into these bushes nice and softly. Oh, mine's going berserk. Right, so we'll pop that in there. He goes in. We haven't put the butterfly on yet. We'll come on to that in a second. Right, he's in. Right, so that's the main shaft through for now. Next we need to put on the various springs and bits and bobs. Now if you remember rightly, the spring sits above, this is where the pedestal, where the throttle idle speed adjustment comes from. Don't worry about that for the time being, because you can soon pull that over in a minute. The next thing we need to do is to sort out the, we need to sort out the linkage for the throttle, which is going to be like that. And then that goes up there, I think. Brain's going blank. Does it go there, Richard? We'll soon find out. I think it does actually. And then when it's in place, that spring goes onto there. And when we then get the throttle in the right orientation, it sits like that. Okay, so when you whiz the throttle open, sorry, the reason it's bouncing backwards and forwards here is because I haven't got a throttle butterfly in here yet, which maybe is something I need to look at next. So I was rabbiting on in the first episode about people soft soldering these things closed and actually leaving all the gubbins on the back there. So what is the problem with these things? They're a deceleration poppet, and the idea behind them is as you decelerate, this poppet, and I've unsoldered this one, opens, okay, and allows for a leaner mixture as you're decelerating. So they're kind of, but as with all of these great ideas, it just don't bloody work. So what actually happens is this disc here doesn't seal properly against the butterfly, and then you end up with all sorts of running issues because it jams at a funny angle, a cute angle, and then it doesn't run properly, and you're struggling to get your idle set up, and you say, oh, Strombergs are shit, and they're not. So it might seem a bit brutal, and it might seem a bit Neanderthal, but I cut these things off and I soft solder those discs on. So let me do that in a minute, because my camera is now full. Right, unloaded all the film off my camera, off my phone, because it's micro SD card packed up, and it's just been a ball's ache, to be honest. Right, some of you more observant will have noticed that I put the throttle shaft in the wrong way round, so I corrected that now, so the throttle shaft is in the right direction. I've also just popped the throttle disc in there. Now, the way this thing is designed to work is that, you see, just pops open, it's pop it, deceleration valve, but they never seat properly against the disc, or I've always had problems with them seating against the disc. So that's the reason why I tend to get rid of them. I don't think you can even get them new with these deceleration poppets on them. That is how successful they were as an idea. So how are we going to do it? Right, we're going to come over here into Mr. Weiss. What we'll do is we will, what have I got here that I can wrap around this? A bit of tape, I think. Yes, a bit of tape. Because obviously I don't want to mark the surface of the throttle disc, but I do want to get the get the thing apart. Bum, 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 bum. There we go. So that can go like that in there. Now it's just a case of hacksawing it, to be honest. I'm going to have to hacksaw it up here. I wonder if I can just. So this has been soft soldered on the end as well for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure I understand why. Right, so that's gone through there. Now can we get that off there? It looks like it's going to come off there. I was thinking about it. It's going to fly, isn't it? There we are, it's off. Nice big spring. I don't know where the other bit went. There it is. One end, the spring, the seat. No, don't want any of that shit. And then what we are going to do is we're going to soft solder this disc onto there a bit more tightly than it's been done already. In fact, what I might do is just see if I can cut that off as well. I might just be able to bend it off. No, I think what we'll do is we'll take the disc out. So it's going to need to be a little bit heated up. Get rid of the soft solder that's holding it in at the moment. and resolder it, because it's going to need a bit of flux, needs a bit of cleaning up, needs to be done properly, just non-bodged. Just a blowtorch. There we are. Right, it's only a soft solder, so there's nothing particularly bananas about it. Right, what I do want to do though is probably clean that face up on that piece. That shouldn't be terrifically hot still. I should be able to take that out. That's good. Let's move you back a bit now. Now, because everything's kind of not where I am, I normally kind of use a heat-proof mat while I'm doing this sort of stuff, but nothing's where I want it to be. Everything's kind of at home and not here, which is a wee pain in the ass. So what we'll do, let's do it on this. I just want something that's going to absorb a bit of the heat. Nice heat-proof mat normally does the trick, but in this case we can't afford that because it's not here. Well, let's heat this thing up first of all and just get the excess solder off it. And this piece here as well. Check the stuff on the back side of it. It's just a little burr, I think, where the where I hacksawed, because for some reason I wasn't very careful doing that. So let's go and get a file. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be putting brand new discs on, then you wouldn't worry about doing this. But if you've got these things and you're struggling to get the tuning right on your car, then this is where I'll be looking. There we go, that's better. Nice clean face there now. Right, now we need to clean these two up. Move that over there. A little bit of steel wool probably. I had a bit, didn't I? Let's get some more. Oh, there it is. Bit of steel wool. That's all right, that's all right. Then a bit of flux. It's just a standard plumber's flux, solder flux shit that I've got going on here. I mean, okay, I'm going a bit berserk with the swallows come back in, shouting at me. Right, so we get that roughly in the right sort of place. We'll heat it up, the flux will melt, and then we'll apply some solder. Okay, that's all we're going to do here. There we go. Right, let's put that there. Where is the solder? What have I done with the solder? Here's the solder. smooth. Got a bit berserk with the solder, so we'll I'll have to file some of this back after it. Right, that's good. That is perfect. So I'll just hold that in place. I'll let that cool down. It's nice and warm. I think that'll do it. Wait for that to cool down, and then we'll put the disc into this carburettor. So what I've done, this is the one that we were building earlier on. So all I need to do here is take out the disc that I just popped in, just for shits and giggles. Bum, 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 bum. Having a nice big heat sink doesn't have to make life easier when you're doing things with blowtorch. Just saves you burning benches and stuff. Right, so we'll flip this throttle open, take this disc out. So you can see the way that I could probably get a feeler gauge in between that disc and the butterfly there. That's why they get a bad reputation. Right. Yeah, that's good. Bit of oil on the back there, because there's oil on the drum, I'm afraid. That's good. Burnt flux and all sorts of shit on there. Oh, it's still warm. Right, but that's done it. Now, I would be really, really, really reluctant to glue these bloody things in. And the reason for that is I don't think there's that many glues out there that are fuel friendly. And whenever I kind of piss around trying to do things like gluing fuel unions or tanks or whatever, more often than not I've had a problem with the way they operate, with the way those glues operate, because sooner or later they just become unstuck. There we go. He's in. Beautiful. Right, that's gone in. And we'll just put the two screws back in. And that kind of is the end of this particular episode. So the two areas of baselining this are really around setting the float height, and ensuring that the needle is installed at the base of the piston, and then you use those two as baseline settings. The jet obviously is something you need to be aware of. Oh, there's one more thing we need to do. We haven't done the choke yet. The cold start mechanism. Right, so let's just put these screws, by the way, I'm not going to reuse these screws. They're just in it to hold things in place. But you can see that throttle is snapping open and closed nicely now. Yeah, beautiful. And we've got rid of the poppet. Nice clean throttle opening now. That's how you do those. Yeah. Right, next let's look at the choke. So let me just get rid of this thing off the bench. Yeah, horrible ganky. Yes, right, the choke on these comes in a number of bits. So what we've basically got was we've got this little adapter which goes onto the side of the carburettor body on this side here, and he goes on there. And the idea behind this is this then allows the rich mixture to go from one carburettor to the other in this pair. Okay, so that piece goes on there, and then the choke body itself goes on that way round. I've cleaned all this out, so you take the nut off that side, take it all apart, give it a real good clean out, and the idea is the fuel goes in that hole and then comes out of these little holes depending on where the choke position is, and richens the mixture. So unlike something like a Land Rover carburettor, type 36 carburettor, Zenith carburettor, which just cuts off the air supply in order to make the mixture richer. On these, I know I've not put any gaskets in there. They have not arrived yet. On these carburetors, all they really do is increase the amount of fuel to the fixed amount of air that's going in. And that's kind of the way it works. There's another thing we've forgotten on here. Now, when it comes to setting these carburetors up, refer to your manual on the choke. But basically, the thing I was gabbling on about, when you pull the choke cable out, you can see how it interfaces with this screw here. And there's a fixed point there, you see. There's a line on there, and that's just pretty much where it contacts. And then as you pull the choke open, it opens the throttle just a little. Not a lot, a little. That's how much. And all that's doing is giving it a fast idle for a cold start. But you don't want to, you don't want a 4,500 RPM fast idle. You want it to be around the 1,200, 1,300 RPM. But follow the manual for that. That's fairly straightforward. The other thing we haven't put onto this yet is the temperature compensator. Now, I'll need to go through how to baseline these things, but I'm going to assume this one's not been taken apart. If we have a quick gander inside it, let me just get rid of all this crap off here, because there's a load of iron filings on here now, and I don't want iron filings all over the place. That can go over there. So if we take a quick gander inside this, two little flathead screws. And inside here we should have a bimetallic strip. It's a bimetallic strip which is fixed at one end, and then that's an adjuster, that screw there. That is the adjuster, and you have to set them up properly. Now the idea behind this thing is, depending on the temperature, the bimetallic strip will lift up this plunger that goes down inside this bowl here. Now we can see if that's working or not just by pushing it. It moves, so that's quite good. That's a good indicator. If we look into the hole that fits into, there's basically a hole right at the bottom there, which the end of that will fit into, and then there's little jet holes either side. There's a jet hole that goes down that tube there, and the idea behind it is that as the car warms up, or as the ambient temperature warms up, then this adapter will pull itself in and allow a slight bypass of fuel, slight bypass of air, and it helps the idle. It just helps the idle. And if you find your car's difficult to start when it's hot and it's not your ignition coil, then I would start by looking at that. There are instructions on building them. I'm not going to build this one in this particular video. Just be aware that that is a bimetallic strip. That's the anchor point, and that's an adjusting point. If you start turning that, you will be adjusting the properties of the bimetallic strip. And they're fussy little buggers, these, but they can be set up. Perhaps I'll do a separate video on bimetallic strips, because I've kind of run out of time on this video. But they are quite important, and when they work well, they're fantastic. That just goes in there like that, and on the side, and then it's just secured using these two little screws. And that, my friends, is one Stromberg CD 175 constant depression carburettor, stripped down, cleaned, rebuilt without gaskets. I know, so I'm not going to be able to run this one up, but rebuilt without gaskets. They're on order, honestly. You would need to order gaskets, and then I'll link below the tuning video. So once they're baselined, you should be able to find tuning is very, very, very simple. But things like excess fuel pressure will affect them. Air leaks will affect them. By the way, if you're struggling to get the carburetors to run properly, there is one useful tip, and that is this stuff. It's one of the few things that is really useful for, is spray it around the mating faces on the carburettor while the engine's running. And if the idle picks up, you've got an air leak. And you're never going to be able to tune them up nicely if you've got an air leak. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching.